Hello, this is a focus on question 3 for language paper 1, and the question that never changes for question 3 is: how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? So just to quickly remind ourselves, this is the overview of language paper 1, and we are focusing on question 3, which is structure, and it is worth 8 marks. So with question 3, it's a tricky question to answer. Probably the hardest question out of the whole of the paper, but these are a few sort of recommendations of what you can do. You can give each, maybe not every paragraph, but the main sort of the main areas of the story of the extract, a heading, sort of a little bit of what each paragraph is focusing on. Again, it doesn't have to be every single paragraph, but roughly speaking, as long as you can piece together the beginning, the middle and the end. Also for the second part there, refer to specific parts through quoting or making line or paragraph references. And then when you get to 3, using the when, what, / who, why to analyse 2 parts of the extract. And finally, using structural terminology, which is really important. So it's not the focus on language, it's actually the focus on structure. So you don't want to be using words like metaphor or simile or anything like that. You want to be using things that are more in line with structure, such as focus, juxtaposition, cliffhangers, foreshadowing, foreboding, those kinds of features. And this is a sort of a generic example of a question 3. So what it'll do is it will say you'll now need to think about the whole of the source, and that never changes. It's the bit in the middle where you can see this text is from the beginning of a novel. That's the only part of the question that changes. It might say, for example, this text is from the middle of a novel or the end of a novel, or it might be the whole thing's a short story. Bear that in mind, because that'll have a lot to do with how things are structured. But the question itself never changes, and that's in bold just underneath, and it says, how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? So that never changes, and underneath it just gives you a few things that you could write about, and I've put the important parts in red. So something at the beginning is a good way to sort of introduce your answer, starting sort of chronological order if you like. How and why the writer changes this focus. So the key word there for me is the focus, and how does it shift from one thing to the next, and then any structural features that interest you. And like I say, there's some examples more specifically on the next slide. And again, we're avoiding using language features because that's not what's going to get us to marks for question 3, but these sort of things are. So beginning, middle and end, focus and shifts are the ones I would always use whatever question. There's always a focus, and it will always shift from one thing to the next. It's almost like visualizing it as like a film or a TV show, thinking that it goes from one thing to the next, but what is the reason behind that, and how are we as readers or as an audience, how are we supposed to feel about that at that particular moment in time? Foreshadowing and foreboding are really good. Don't forget foreshadowing, like implying that something or hinting that something's going to happen later on, and foreboding is more specific. It's hinting that something bad is going to happen later on. And cliffhangers are good, not always used, but very good if you can spot them. Flashbacks again are very important, again not always used, but important to include if you spot one. I feel like juxtaposition is one that's used more commonly in stories, that I always find that the ending can juxtapose with the beginning, or if not, become almost secular. Or cyclical, sorry. So you might find that a character juxtaposes with the mood and atmosphere, or you might find that a character's role juxtaposes. They might start out as vulnerable and then conclude the story being strong powerful and fearless, and that obviously those two things juxtaposed, being powerful juxtaposed with being vulnerable. So that's an example of how juxtaposition can be used. And repetition is an example of a structural feature. Any words or phrases that are repeated for a particular reason might reinforce a particular mood or atmosphere in the story. Again, just to remind ourselves, if you look on the right hand side in green, these are the sort of things that you want to be using throughout. These are just examples. So saying when something happens, saying what or who, saying why, and different examples of structural terminology. But the things in red are the things to sort of avoid. Like I said, I've mentioned language features before, but also in addition to that, sentence types and punctuation. Those sort of things won't contribute to your marks when analysing structure. When we answer question 3 and we get to the bit where we explain why something happens, we seem to run out of steam a little bit, and we kind of say generic things like it makes us want to read on, or it's done because it's supposed to, without, you know, it makes us want to find out more about something, and it kind of leads to nowhere really. But these are a few examples of what you can say for why, depending on what it is. So top left hand corner, it might reveal a character's inner thoughts and feelings and attitudes, allows us to delve in more and give us a better understanding of a character. In the middle at the top, establishes a specific place, era, or a specific social setting. Maybe something's done to create a certain mood. That might be humour, might be suspense, gloom, fear, so on and so forth. And there's loads of different examples there that you can read and use in your response if ever you come across these sort of things. So to put it into practice, all I want you to do now is have a look at a copy of The Power. That's the extract that we're going to use for this particular question, and have a read through from start to finish, being conscious of structure and how it's structured and why it's structured to in a certain way to interest us as a reader. Okay, so I've just picked out certain bits of the extract, not all of it, and just to give you a sort of an indication of the sort of things to look for. So it's called The Power, and it's an extract from the beginning of a novel. And part of the story, two men break into the house while Roxy and her mother are there. When Roxy tries to fight back, she experiences an unusual sensation. Okay. So this beginning part here, I've just picked out the first two paragraphs, and I've highlighted key quotes within the first two paragraphs, and around it I've got key bits of information. First of all, if you look at the very beginning, the men come at 9:30 in the evening. So what it does, it's the beginning, and it introduces characters with no names, the men, and it creates this anonymous tone, this very mysterious mood and atmosphere. So that's something that you can add or annotate on your in your books or on the actual copy of The Power. If you have a look into the time of the day as well, it establishes a sense of foreboding, i.e. something bad is going to happen. So presumably the other characters, Roxy and her mum, are in danger. And as you read on into the second paragraph, it's reinforced, this sense of danger is reinforced by the aggression, and it shocks and makes the reader question why they are doing this. What's the purpose behind their visit, if you like, to put it politely. And their appearance further forebodes danger and uncertainty for Roxy and her mum, because one's described with a face like a rat and the other short and square-jawed. It creates this sense of like a very aggressive, hostile environment. As we read on, I'm focused on something, roughly speaking, it doesn't have to be smack bang in the middle, but something where you can see that the focus has shifted or changed in some way, shape or form. So the first bit here is the short one grabs her mum by the throat. So the middle part here, focus shifts to the danger and violence. Further on though, we've got vulnerability shown through Roxy and her mum. However, the final sentence of that paragraph where it says, it's just a feeling at her fingers' ends, a prickle in her thumbs, it reveals to the reader a shift in power, a cliffhanger to that paragraph really. It appears at the end of the sentence, which adds to the mystery surrounding Roxy, and readers are left wondering what this feeling means. I've put there the repetition of run reinforces the danger that surrounds Roxy and her mum. Further on, if we go to, she grabs his wrist and she twists something quite deep inside her chest, as if she'd always known how to do it. He tries to wriggle out of her grip, but it's too late. This shift in power should excite the reader at this point, because then suddenly this vulnerability is gone. And it's almost like Roxy juxtaposes with how she was at the beginning. We no longer see this uncertain kind of character. Now we see this this vulnerable character. Now we see someone that's starting to gain the advantage, if you like, and the focus shifts to reveal her powers, which overwhelm the men. So there's a crackling flash and a sound like a paper snapper. All those things kind of juxtapose with the beginning. And so I've kind of moved it along towards the end, if not the very end, and the highlighted quotes I've got there is, he stands his ground and she takes another step. We've almost got like two characters, the protagonist and the antagonist, squaring up to each other, and it creates a sense of intensity. So the mood and atmosphere is intensified through the chaos that has happened. He motions toward her with the knife. She reaches out, touches the back of his good hand, does the same twist. Nothing happens. So we've reached a cliffhanger. We don't know how this is. We don't know how it concludes. So it leaves us with a sense of mystery and uncertainty. We've got lots of questions at the end of it. We don't know who comes out of it alive. So it leaves us in suspense, and that's how the story concludes. But the character of Roxy, juxtaposed with how she's presented at the beginning, she starts off with no power, and then ends up with trying to gain the advantage and almost like surprising the men. So we've got lots of different things that you can talk about in a natural response. And with that in mind, I just wanted to show you a model example of a beginning, middle and end. And I've put a key there on the right hand side, green for structural feature, red for quote, and blue for explanation. So the first part here, the beginning, focuses on something sinister happening in lines 1 to 7. Always worth putting using line references or line numbers, because there's so much to look at, and we're not expecting you to reference every single word and line in the extract. That's not what it's about. It's about picking the gold within it and the highlights and going with it. And obviously we won't want you to specifically reference lines 1 to 7, but you can, by using line numbers, it allows you to pick a chunk of the extract, and then what you can do is, like I've done here, is zoom in on particular words or phrases in those line references. For example, the men who come at 9:30 in the evening and a face like a rat. So that could be your example of zooming in and using a collection of key references. And the blue is just explaining, and this is really where students need to focus. So this is where students might go, it makes us want to read on and so on, but this is how you do it. So what does it reveal to the reader? That there's potential danger, as the time of day alludes to something dangerous and potentially frightening. Why is this done? It therefore places the reader in suspense. The writer wants us to feel in suspense, because we're unsure what the reason is behind this, like I said, this visit that is happening. Their potential danger is further reinforced by the writer describing one of the men having a face like a rat. So it's these key quotes that help match the sort of the frightening, dangerous atmosphere. Adding a hostile suspense for beginning, which forebodes something terrible happening. I should have highlighted forebodes in green, because forebodes is another example of a structural feature. There you go. Something terrible happening to both Roxy and her mom. The writer has done this to establish mystery, leaving the reader with a sense of dread as we are helpless in the situation. So that's an example of how to use structural feature using references and how to explain them. Another example is looking at how you continue this response. So looking at something in the middle, the focus then shifts I would always use, because it's a great way of using a structural feature at the very beginning to the danger reaching a violent outcome between the men and Roxy and her mom during lines 8 to 15. The writer wants to establish the power and dominance of the men, showing how physically aggressive they are, which frightens the reader, thus leaving them in suspense, as we are once again helpless in the situation. And what you can do is, you don't have to focus on specific line numbers in one paragraph. You can move the focus again if you want to. So I've put, however, the focus again shifts to Roxy, drawing attention to a prickle in her thumbs. So sometimes you might find a keyword or phrase that you zoom in on and go, right, the attention is really on this moment. And it's this moment where I think that the tension and the suspense shifts to something else. So this changes the feeling of dread to one of intrigue for the reader, as the writer focuses on Roxy and her mysterious powers. And it also creates a cliffhanger at the end of the paragraph to draw the reader into seeing how Roxy uses these powers against the men. And the final paragraph here is looking at the end. So towards the end, what does it establish? It establishes Roxy shifting the power dominance in lines 45 to 57 as something started to happen, allowing her powers to dominate the men and protect her mom. The writer does this to juxtapose with her vulnerability at the beginning, changing the mood from dread to excitement as the readers feel drawn to Roxy and her powers. The attention to detail regarding how she uses her powers reinforces the excitement for the reader as she grabs his wrist, and crackling flash and sound like sandpaper intensifies the magnitude of Roxy's mysterious powers. However, the very end reaches a final cliffhanger as lines 68 to 70 refrains from revealing the outcome of Roxy using her powers once more, only for the end to reveal that nothing happened. This leaves the reader in suspense, creating a cyclical structure which leaves the reader wanting to know the outcome between the men and Roxy and her mom, similar to how the story began. And that there is a way of looking at how to use quotes, structural features, but how to explain the relevance and the importance of them being used at that particular moment in time.